thinking of things like kindness and compassion, we don't usually think of them as skills. I think most of us, at least the way we're raised, unless we were, raised in a family of meditators or psychologists or, people who are probably, you might think about this differently, but most people, you know some people and they are more compassionate, other people are less so. Some people are very empathetic, some people are not. Some people are super kind and caring, other people seem to be more callous. And it just seems like we're just hardwired one way or the other. What the world's meditative traditions and what the research, all the research, we've been doing recently with the Healthy Minds program and you've been doing for many decades is showing is that actually these are best thought of as skills.
Yeah, so I think, one of the important taglines in the recent scientific evidence is that it's easier than you think. And it may be easier than you think because it is innate. And so when we cultivate the skills of kindness, we actually can see changes in the brain in just a couple of weeks of practice in people who've never meditated before. It's kind of remarkable.
Welcome everyone to the first ever Dharma Lab podcast. I am here with my longtime friend and mentor and dear Dharma brother, Richie Davidson. I'm guessing many of you, if you're tuning in, are well aware of Richie and his work. And this is the first time not the first time we're having a deep conversation on science and meditation and well-being, but the first time we're doing this under the banner of Dharma Lab, which we've been thinking about for quite some time. So we're delighted to have you with us. And we were thinking about what we would do today, what conversation we would use to kick off this new initiative. And I think we both agreed that we wanted to do something around altruism, kindness, and compassion. This is the motivating force in our lives. It's what's motivated us to do this in the first place. So we wanted to start our conversation here. And we thought another kind of shared impulse was that we both immediately thought about His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, who has been a great inspiration. He's famous for having said that my religion is kindness, which is one of these quotes that's floating around the internet that you see everywhere that's attributed to him. And it really just sums up his whole approach. Richie, you actually know His Holiness so well. You've been a close confidant of his. You've had countless hours and days and weeks and months spent with him in deep dialogue. And I'm just curious, does that ring true? I mean, what do you think he would say if you were to sit him down and ask him really what the most important thing about the spiritual path and perhaps even life more generally actually is from his teachings and tradition? What do you think he would actually say?
Yeah, well, thank you, Cort, and it's great to be here for the inaugural session of Dharma Lab. And also just to alert viewers, tomorrow, July 6th, is His Holiness's 90th birthday. So this is really a very auspicious time for us to be talking about kindness and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The quote that you mentioned, kindness is my religion, is really one that I feel most people feel when we're in the presence of His Holiness. It is something that he just truly embodies, and it is so deep and powerful that it's virtually everyone I know who's had the opportunity to be in close contact with him one-on-one or in a small group can feel palpably. And part of it is simply the quality of his presence. When he's with you, he is just completely with you, totally connected. And you also have this uncanny experience that he recognizes what may be going on in you, and he's doing something to be helpful, to be kind, and it could be really very ordinary. For example, he might notice that you're not comfortable in a chair, and he might help adjust the cushion. just little things of that sort. They're so everyday things, but he does them all the time. And it doesn't matter who you are, he does them with everybody. And I've seen it not just directed toward me, I've seen it directed toward so many others. Uh, and it's really unique, I think, and inspiring to see what is possible.
It's such a cool thing because I had been meditating about 8 or 9 years when I moved over to Asia, when I ended up spending almost a decade there. And I had been doing mindfulness practices. I had been training my attention, and that's kind of what I thought of as meditation. In my mind, that's sort of the space of meditation is you're sitting down, you're learning to be present, you notice how distracted you are, you train yourself to come back and to be less distracted. And I was really kind of surprised when I started meeting these amazing meditators. I didn't meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama till many years later, thanks to you actually. But I met great meditators like Mingyur Rinpoche and other luminaries of these traditions. And what I saw is actually mindfulness, it's certainly an important part, not to say it's unimportant, but you hear much more about kindness. You hear much more about being of service. You hear much more about just having this attitude that you just expressed with His Holiness of just wherever you are, whatever you're doing, try to do good in the world. Try to be of benefit to others. And that was kind of shocking to me. I was like, why didn't why didn't somebody tell me that? I've been paying attention to my breath for 8 years, and actually this is the most important thing. I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, and this has affected me deeply, both personally in my own personal practice, but also as a scientist. And for example, uh, there's a researcher who I'll not name at this point, maybe later in Dharma Lab we can take up some of his work, but he's studying advanced concentration practices, advanced kind of mindfulness practices, if you will. I asked him at one point, does this make you any kinder? Um, because that's for me, it's the real acid test, if you will. If it's not having an impact on one's kindness toward others, what's the point? And that's something that I think the Dalai Lama would say, and has really influenced me from being around the Dalai Lama.
And that's exactly how it's viewed, in Buddhist psychology, for example, where mindfulness and the training of attention is a critically important foundational piece, but it's like the foundation for the house. If you just stop there, it'd be like building the foundation and not actually building the house. Wisdom and compassion, wisdom and kindness are actually the kind of the core components. But you need to have some stability of attention to do that effectively. You need to be mindful, to be present, to be aware. But let's maybe dive in a little bit to this topic because these are terms when we hear terms like kindness and compassion, we know intuitively what they mean, obviously. We can recognize them when we see them. But in Buddhist psychology and likewise in science, we really have to define these terms. They can't be vague and fuzzy because you want to really be able to tune into the right frequency and nurture and cultivate these qualities. So I'm curious, maybe we could just start there. As a scientist, when you first started encountering this whole area as a topic of research, and there was a time when it really wasn't even on the map, it certainly is now. How did you even go about thinking about it? How did you even get clear in your own mind what is even meant when we use a term like kindness that is kind of clear in one way but fuzzy in another way?
Yeah, it's a huge and important question. And let me just say that when all this work started, I remember the first time um, I met the Dalai Lama in 1992, and I was doing neuroscientific research on depression and anxiety and stress. I was a meditator then. I was a closet meditator. I didn't tell very many people that I was a meditator, and I wasn't doing research on meditation then. And he asked me why we couldn't use the same tools of neuroscience that we were using then to study depression and anxiety and stress and use those tools to study kindness and to study compassion. And one of the things that is just important to recognize is that in 1992, if you go back to textbooks of neuroscience, I guarantee there's not a single textbook that would have the word kindness or compassion in the index. And today it's very different. And so that's
And that's just
super cool.
crazy, by the way. I mean, when we think about how important these things are for us just in our human experience, like how that's a pretty big blind spot that the whole research community had. It's kind of stunning when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also, I think, stunning to recognize how quickly things have changed in a very positive way. One of the things that we were sharing before we started recording is that I don't think that there is a single study in the scientific literature that actually distinguishes the brain mechanisms or the neural correlates of kindness and compassion in the same participants.
Hmm.
There have been studies on kindness and there have been studies on compassion, but there never has been a study that directly compared them. And when we think about it and getting closer toward a more rigorous definition, compassion is a quality that is associated with a disposition to relieve another person's suffering.
Hmm.
And that's when we see um, compassion. Those are the causes and conditions that allow compassion to arise when it's been primed, when it's ready to be expressed. Um, Kindness is something that doesn't require, if you will, suffering. You can be kind to someone who's happy. You can be kind to someone who is free from suffering, just to be kind. And kindness is associated with acts of that benefit another person in one way or another, acts of generosity, acts of caring, uh, and they don't that they're and so there's not this sort of prerequisite of suffering, if you will. Um, and they're very closely related, but we don't know to what extent that they actually overlap in terms of brain mechanisms and so forth.
Yeah, that maps really well onto the understanding of these qualities in Buddhist psychology. I mentioned how one of the first things you learn when you start studying these roadmaps of the mind and roadmaps in meditation for how you can train and transform the mind, you get these really precise definitions. And these terms, kindness and compassion, are defined very simply as the motivation toward happiness, to promote happiness, you could say, and the motivation to relieve suffering, as you just said. So kindness is just the impulse or the motivation to promote happiness. So that could be for yourself, like if it's feeling a moment of kindness where you want yourself to be happy, to flourish, any of those positive experiences, that would be a moment of kindness. Equally, you could feel that to another person. You could feel it towards a pet. You could feel it towards somebody on the other side of the planet. You could feel it towards any and all living creatures. And there are practices in the Buddhist tradition for which you do just that. Compassion, again, is just the same thing, but oriented to relieving suffering. And it raises an interesting question. In fact, even as I say this, I'm remembering long philosophical discussions I had with our friend and colleague Antoine Lutz, who, as we both know, is very philosophical and loves these kind of deep conversations. I remember having hours-long conversations about this. So I'll ask you, in your mind, and from a scientific point of view, would you view kindness and compassion as feelings or more a motivational state? Like, is it necessary? Is it kind of inherently a feeling quality, or is the feeling kind of a byproduct of it, and it's more of a motivation that may or may not come along with the feeling? I'm curious
Yeah,
what you
so
think the science says on that.
yeah, so there's a very well-known paper that was published about 15 years ago by Dacher Keltner and one of his colleagues at UC Berkeley. Dacher is a very well-known social psychologist who is the founder of the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley. And Dacher is an emotion psychologist, and he grew up in the tradition of Paul Ekman and discrete emotions and facial expressions associated with different emotions. And the paper, this paper is a review paper on compassion, and he concludes in this paper that compassion is an emotion. Now, it doesn't mean, from his perspective, that it doesn't also include a motivational component. But I would say, from my experience as a practitioner, first of all, and also from tidbits of scientific evidence, and we can talk about that in a minute, that I would say that kindness and compassion are different from other emotions that we normally think of as an emotion, like happiness or sadness, because the motivational component is absolutely central to the state. It's not, you cannot have compassion or kindness without the accompanying motivational stance.
Yeah.
In the case of kindness, the disposition to make another person or yourself happy. In the case of compassion, the disposition to relieve suffering. That is, those are essential features of the state itself. And that's just not true of other emotions in the same way.
Yeah, actually, it's such an important point because when it comes to practicing these things, and we'll talk about that next. In fact, I think we'd like to cover a few things in this discussion. Right now, we're in the realm of just what are we even talking about here? What is kindness and compassion? Why does it matter? We'll talk a little bit about the brain and the science that what we've learned from a scientific perspective, but also how do we practice this? And more importantly, how do we apply this in our lives? This is kind of the traditional Buddhist framework of view, meditation, and application. So we'll kind of cover all of these to some degree. But it's actually a really important point when it comes to having a nuanced understanding of what we're talking about, because when you're practicing this, if you over orient to the feeling, strangely you become a little self-absorbed. It's kind of a strange way to say it. The motivational stance, like right now, for example, I'm looking at you, Richie, and if I'm just thinking, I love this guy. This has been one of the most meaningful relationships in my life. I've benefited so much from this. I want to do whatever I can to help Richie in whatever way I can. Like if he needs help, I want to be there for him. Like I'm just, I'm like as I'm saying that, I'm having feelings, but the important thing is that I'm oriented to you, right? In that moment, the important thing is that my motivational stance, as you put it, is directed towards you. Whereas if I'm kind of overly fixated on what am I feeling right now, it starts in that feeling of connection, but then quickly it's like my attention kind of comes back in and I'm now oriented back to kind of, am I feeling the right thing? What's going on here? And then I'm out of that relational space. And I've seen this a lot when people are learning these practices and learning how to meditate on kindness and compassion, for example. People can get stuck in a little bit of a loop where it's not that there's not a feeling. Of course, all sorts of feelings come and go in the space of kindness and compassion. But if that's what you're oriented to, you kind of lose the motivational piece. And that strangely short circuits it. And people just kind of get stuck in a very weird loop, not realizing what has happened there. So it's actually, it might sound like these definitions aren't a very big deal or feels very dry and technical, but they help us to kind of orient to the right frequency and experience when it comes to actually recognizing and practicing these things. So I've got another question for you that is kind of in this space, or maybe you have something you just want to comment on. But I wanted to bring up another
Oh,
subtle
please go
distinction.
ahead.
Well, I
Yeah.
just wanted to bring up another subtle distinction, which is something that relates to the feeling motivational aspects of these experiences, and that's the difference between empathy and compassion. And again, these are words that we throw around in common usage that oftentimes feel like the same thing, but there's some important distinction, and there's some really, really important science that has been very formative in this whole field. So I wonder if you could just share your thoughts on that and why it might matter.
Yeah, here the science is very clear and really super important. So, one aspect of empathy is feeling the emotions of another. So, when we're empathizing with someone who's in pain, we're kind of feeling their pain. When we're empathizing with someone who's sad, we're feeling their sadness. And that's a really important piece of empathy. And when we are feeling the emotion of another, say we're empathizing with a person who is in pain, research shows that the empathizer has a brain state that resembles the brain state of the person with whom they're empathizing in showing activation of pain networks. So
So if
if
you
you're
stub your
empathizing,
toe and I'm like observing that and you kind of, jump up and shout a little bit, my pain network, just watching you, obviously your pain network in your brain is activated, but my pain network is going to activate if I'm experiencing
exactly,
empathy.
exactly, and that is, um, one of the things that we could talk about. And I have a question for you about whether empathy is a prerequisite for the cultivation
Yeah,
of
that's a great.
compassion.
That's the one that got
And
Antoine and I arguing till like 2 a.m. was
yeah,
was actually that.
so we can get to that in a moment, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. But with regard to this issue now, it's so important because there are people in the helping professions, for example, in healthcare, for example, who talk about compassion burnout. And what we think is actually going on is empathy burnout, where they haven't really learned to cultivate compassion. They're empathizing with the patients they're treating. The patients are typically in pain, they're suffering. The healthcare provider is also suffering when she or he is empathizing with them. And that actually activates all kinds of stress networks in the brain. It affects the body, and it really is going to erode our well being after a while. Um, Compassion is totally different. If you have compassion for a person in pain, you are not activating any of the pain matrix whatsoever. It's a completely different network, and it actually involves activating networks that are important for positive emotion. It involves networks that are um, important in action,
Hmm.
where and that's actually something
Actually, that
super interesting.
yeah, go into that because that was one of the most fascinating things when I was looking at the neuroscience of this, is the motor cortex firing like that. Like why do you think that is? I mean, there's something important in that that gets back to this motivational state point.
Exactly, exactly. And this is one of the reasons why it's difficult to think of it simply as an emotion and nothing else, because it has this action piece to it. When we first observed activation in the motor cortex, when expert long-term meditators were generating compassion in the laboratory, they're doing it in a meditative posture. Actually, they're doing it in the scanner, so they're really still. They're not moving anything, and yet their motor cortex is firing away. And when we
And the
first
motor, just
observed
as a
that,
footnote, could you say just for those who don't know, a couple sentences on the motor cortex? Like what even is that?
so yeah, so thank you for reminding me to do that. The motor cortex is a part of our cerebral cortex that is involved in the control of action, literally moving our hands,
So
moving
actually
our feet,
taking physical action.
taking physical action. Yeah. Now you do see motor cortex activation when you're imagining action,
Mm.
too. So it doesn't actually require the physical expression of the action, but its origins is in the physical expression of the action. Um, and so we see this big time in when these long-term practitioners are generating compassion, and I remember when we first talked to Mingyur Rinpoche about this, and he said, of course, it's when you're generating compassion, you're preparing yourself to act, so that
Mm.
the moment you encounter suffering in the world, you will spontaneously act. And so it's a kind of action preparation.
So yeah, this is hugely important, and I think the key point is precisely that we're training, we're priming ourselves to help if and when we can, basically. So if we go back to that example, like say you stub your toe, you can see, I think, pretty clearly in the distinction you just made, so like how that might play out in totally different ways. So there's one way in which you stub your toe, and then suddenly I have that ouch moment. It might start, both of these pathways might start with the resonance where I feel a little bit of the ouch. I didn't stub my toe, but I certainly know what that feels like. Maybe I remember having stubbed my toe myself, and it just, triggers a little inner cascade. But from there, it could go totally different directions. It could go in one direction where I just start paying attention to regulating my own emotion, right? Like I'm suddenly hurting a little bit, or I'm remembering being hurt, and I'm kind of more oriented to what's going on in myself. And you can imagine, as you said, if you were caring for somebody who had some catastrophic suffering. I mean, say you're a nurse or a doctor working in a hospital with people who are suffering tremendously, and day in and day out, you are witnessing their suffering, and it's triggering that empathic response, but then you're just getting overwhelmed by your own empathy, basically. So that's one pathway where it kind of takes you out of the relational space and into your own inner processing of whatever you're dealing with. But a very different one is the caring response. I see that and I have that empathic moment where I feel the ouch, I can resonate with it, but instead I'm leaning forward. And whether I do something physically or not, it's kind of you're staying oriented to the caring impulse, where
Yeah.
maybe I can do something to help you. Maybe I can't. Maybe I just need to be there and let you know that I care. But I'm oriented to you in that moment. I'm not kind of back in my own little world trying to regulate my own response. My primary orientation in that moment is actually to you, and it stays with you. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, the crucial distinction about compassion fatigue versus empathy fatigue.
Absolutely. And one of the things that is really striking to appreciate is that this difference actually can emerge relatively early in life based on experiences that a child has with his or her caregivers. And to give you one example in research that we did a long time ago, we studied a group of more than 300 toddlers who were about little over 3 years old, in a scenario where the experimenter feigned getting their fingers stuck in. You remember those old clipboards that had the clip at the top?
Yeah,
And the
you're like
experimenter
clipping
was,
it. Yeah.
yeah, and the experimenter was holding one of these clipboards and then, feigned getting their fingers stuck and said, ouch. And, we videotaped data from more than 350 kids, 3-year-olds watching this. And some of the 3-year-olds just, when the experimenter said ouch and, had this pain expression, they just burst out crying.
Hmm.
um, just burst out crying. And there are other kids who go over to the experimenter and kiss their finger.
Oh my God. That's like,
And
yeah, that's like
and
the
you can just
picture
see
perfect
these.
demonstration of empathy versus compassion, like in action.
Exactly. Exactly. And what I would hypothesize is that their caregivers, the significant adults in their life, were probably modeling these differences in their early experience. And by the age of, they were on average 36 months of age. At that age, they were already showing, these differences.
And so what you're saying is not only there's the stark difference, I mean, in that example, you could see a very stark difference in terms of the actual manifestation. One baby's crying, the other baby is like up and, going and lending, trying to care for the person who got hurt. But you're saying that if you look at the brain, the science shows that it's completely separate, completely different brain networks that are also firing. Even though we think about empathy and compassion, it's actually a completely separate brain network in both those cases.
Yeah, they're really non-overlapping. Non-overlapping. And so the question I had for you, Court, we've talked to contemplative practitioners about this a lot, and I haven't gotten a clear answer from any of them. I'd love to hear your comments, but and it really has to do with whether empathy is actually a necessary prerequisite for compassion in the course of developing compassion.
Yeah, so I'll put a firm stake in the ground, saying I think it's a very helpful and oftentimes is the precursor, but I don't think it's 100% necessary. And here's why. I think there are situations where we can care for somebody that is having an experience that is utterly incomprehensible to us. There are some things that we can't even really imagine what somebody else is going through, much less really feel what they're feeling. It's just so beyond our experience. And yet, we can still care for them. We can still
Mhm.
see that they're suffering, want them not to suffer, but we can't even really simulate. Like what happens in empathy is this ability of the brain to simulate an experience.
Mhm.
And there's varying degrees of which how closely we can simulate it. And in some cases, I think that that just is impossible. And so there are experiences where, you could probably get yourself using the imagination to generate empathy for something that's very distant. But again, I don't think it's necessary. I think oftentimes we can have a caring response that's just instantaneous for something that even we don't really understand, because we just understand that somebody is suffering. We don't understand how. We don't really understand the circumstances they're grappling with, but yet we know they're suffering. So
I think
you,
that's a good example.
yeah.
It's
So
a
I
very
think
good
it's
example.
so it's yeah. So it's a. Having said that, empathy is certainly one of the easiest ways into it. If you can start with the resonance and then kind of move into it, it's one, maybe the main pathway, but I don't think it's the only one. So it's an interesting terrain. It'd be interesting to looking at the brain, like kind of the cascade of brain networks that are firing in different pathways that lead to that moment where you're ready and willing to help someone.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen, in we talked about the Dalai Lama earlier. I've seen situations with him where someone described, a really tragic situation with Tibetans getting tortured, and he's visibly crying. And clearly, I think that would be, thought of as an empathic response, at least initially, but it doesn't last long, and it
Mm.
very quickly transitions. And so, um, there's an element of emotional fluidity that is part of this, which is, we that's a topic for another Dharma Lab conversation. But
We
I
definitely got to
think
have
that
that
that's
one.
really, yeah,
So there's another debate. It's a slightly different angle to this, but one I know that you've thought a lot about. So I want to ask you about it. And it's a centuries old debate in the meditative traditions, which is whether things like kindness and compassion are innate, or they are things that we just have or don't have to varying degrees, and then if we cultivate them, we kind of need to build them up and cultivate them over time. So I have a view on that from a more meditative point of view, which you can probably guess, but I'm happy to share. But I'm very curious what you think from a scientific point of view. Is the
yeah.
research point in any particular direction on that question?
Yeah, so here I interpret the research as providing a very strong and unambiguous answer to this question, and that is that humans are born to be kind and they're born to be compassionate. This is really part of who we are as human beings. And to some viewers, this may sound strange in the extraordinary chaos that we're living in now, the all the challenges in the world today, the hatred that we see, which is real. Uh, but the data show that in early infancy, prior to a lot of conditioning, for example, in 6-month-old infants, if you expose them to scenarios that are pro-social, where kindness is expressed, versus situations that are matched in physical characteristics, but where the interaction is selfish and aggressive. The infants 6 months of age show a very, very clear and very strong preference for the kind pro-social interaction. It's really non-ambiguous. It's totally clear. And so from these kinds of data, um, I strongly conclude that we come into the world with this kind of propensity. And so it's when we do practices to cultivate kindness and to cultivate compassion, we're not creating these qualities de novo, just out of nowhere, but really, we can say, I think, that we're recognizing the true nature of our mind. This is the way we are. Now, we can learn to do all kinds of negative things. There's no doubt about that. But uh, we begin with this innate propensity, this kind of innate bias. And that, I think, is super important and has huge implications. And it also suggests that, our research shows that it actually doesn't take that much to get these networks in the mind and the brain going, so to speak. Little acts of kindness actually happen all the time. We typically are not so aware of them, but when we become more aware of them and we're more intentional about them, we see that our everyday lives can be just filled with these, and they have real consequences. Even with all the terrible things going on in the world, I think that for a large percentage of the population, not for all, but for a large percentage of the population, there's a lot of kindness in everyday life.
That also matches, I think, a lot some of the views we find in meditative traditions. There's a really interesting distinction. I mean, I think there's a tremendous amount of subtlety here, so I'm going to give a bit of a simplification. But I think you could say there's two general approaches in the world's meditative traditions when it comes to meditating with and on qualities like kindness and compassion. One is a view in which you kind of view the human mind as this hodgepodge of wholesome and unwholesome qualities. And basically what you're doing in meditation is you're learning to dial up the wholesome qualities and you're learning to dial down the unwholesome ones, with the obvious result being that you will suffer less and flourish more because you've basically done away with the things that are causing your suffering, the unwholesome qualities. So, for example, if you experience anger or aggression or anxiety, you essentially can swap it out with a feeling of kindness or compassion that basically serves to remedy the unwholesome quality. It's kind of like the antidote. Like you have a poison. In fact, the language that's used is the language of poison and antidotes. So kindness, for example, is the antidote to anger. If you have kindness, by definition, you won't have anger, and vice versa. So that's kind of one view, which is a little bit different than the picture you're painting from a scientific perspective. The other view is completely different. The view is actually that qualities like kindness and compassion are innate. And not only are they innate, but they are actually present in any moment of experience. And when we meditate on kindness, for example, we're not choosing between competing mental states. It's more like we're bringing something into focus that oftentimes can be quite subtle. Sometimes it's not subtle. In a moment of great affection, obviously it's not subtle, but most of the time it's quite subtle. So with kindness, for example, you could say, take something that might seem very, very unintuitive, like anxiety. I used to experience a ton of anxiety. In fact, I used to, as you know, Richie, be completely phobic of public speaking. So something like this would have just completely thrown me into an anxious, emotional tailspin. So if you take something like anxiety, that would seem like it's very clearly in the unwholesome bucket. Where is kindness or compassion in that kind of experience? But if you look at it, you could see that also, although there's clearly a very toxic impact, and a lot of the ways something like anxiety can manifest can certainly be unhealthy, within all of that, within all the many things that are happening in a moment of anxiety, there's actually a lot of care. There's a lot of self-preservation. There's a lot of just a very basic impulse to not want to suffer and to want to be free from circumstances that one perceives, whether rightly or wrongly, to be a threat to oneself. And so you're basically it's a protective mechanism. So at the core, we're just trying to be safe. We're just trying to protect ourselves. It's manifesting in a way that might be dysfunctional or toxic, but at its core, it has these very wholesome impulses. So you can find that even in the most toxic state of mind, you can find these wholesome elements. So from that point of view, and the meditative traditions that have this perspective and this the Tibetan tradition is one that takes this more innate kind of view. The whole practice is not trying to get better at something. I like to say it's not about self-improvement. It's really self-exploration. It's self-discovery because you're not changing anything. You're just learning to tune into these frequencies of experience that are always there. So it sounds like the science
Yeah,
is,
absolutely.
is pointing in that direction.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and sometimes I use the metaphor of a perceptual illusion. Some of you may remember the famous illusion of the vase and the faces, where, in one instant you can see them as two profiles, and another instant you see it as the vase. And it's the same physical object. And when we recognize the innate kindness in something like anxiety, it's just shifting the perspective. And that it's like with a perceptual illusion, just the shift in perspective can just bring an entirely different way of seeing the world. And so much can change with that. And so I very much think that that is an apt metaphor, and the research really does show that kindness is something that we see in virtually 100% of very young infants. Um, and so I think that there's a lot of merit to this approach.
And that brings us to the practice side of this because it's thinking of things like kindness and compassion. We don't usually think of them as skills. I think most of us, at least the way we're raised, unless we were, raised in a family of meditators or psychologists or, people who are probably, you might think about this differently, but most people, you know some people and they are more compassionate, other people are less so. Some people are very empathetic, some people are not. Some people are super kind and caring, other people seem to be more callous. And it just seems like we're just hardwired one way or the other. What the world's meditative traditions and what the research, all the research, we've been doing recently with the Healthy Minds program and you've been doing for many decades is showing is that actually these are best thought of as skills. We might have a predisposition. It might be easier or harder for some people, but everybody can learn these things. And not only is it improve these, obviously it improves our relationships, but it's hugely important for mental health and well-being. So maybe we could just talk a little bit about that. I'm just reminded as we're talking this finding from epidemiological research around the physical health impact. Maybe you could share a little bit about that. But I'd like to ask about the research on training next, because it seems, more and more these days, our attention is shifting beyond mindfulness to see that actually there's many, many important forms of meditation, many ways to practice these skills, and the science is quite exciting in this pioneering area.
Yeah, so I think, one of the important taglines in the recent scientific evidence is that it's easier than you think. And it may be easier than you think because it is innate. And so when we cultivate the skills of kindness, we actually can see changes in the brain in just a couple of weeks of practice in people who've never meditated before. It's kind of remarkable. And what's really cool is that in some research, the changes in the brain that we see after just 2 weeks of training actually predict a person's propensity to behave altruistically in a rigorous kind of task designed to assess that. And so it's possible and it's easy, and it doesn't take that much to get these circuits going. And so I think that that's really important and good news. Uh, and I really believe that given the kind of polycrisis that we're facing today, we have a moral obligation to bring this into the world in as many sectors as we can. Certainly, education is one of them. Imagine what the world would be like if all our kids went through this kind of training early on. I think things would really be different.
And that, we have really, really, really exciting data, stuff that we haven't even published yet. One of our our colleagues, Matt Hirschberg, is doing amazing work in the school systems. Could you give us a little sneak peek? I know this is stuff we haven't published yet, but I know some
Well,
of the
one piece
analyses have
is,
been done.
yeah, I mean, one piece is published that's relevant to this discussion, and that is that among school teachers who are given our Healthy Minds program, which includes a significant section on kindness and compassion training, it's our connection module, that they actually show reductions in measures of implicit bias. Now, what is implicit bias? Implicit bias is kind of a cellular bias. This is bias toward members of ethnic and racial outgroups. And one of the really big
Could you
challenges,
say, do you think you could just say unconscious bias? I mean, it's
yeah,
usually below the level of conscious experience, right?
exactly. So below the level of conscious experience. And it's measured behaviorally. So if you gave a questionnaire to these teachers and asked them if they're biased toward these groups, probably 99% of the teachers would say on the questionnaire that they're not biased. But if you administer this more sensitive measure of unconscious bias, you see that even though people don't want to be biased, they are biased because of their upbringing, the things to which they've been exposed. Um, and they really just can't help it, so to speak. And what we find is that training in these qualities actually reduces this measure of unconscious bias, which is huge because this kind of unconscious bias is really at the root of a lot of academic differences, what we call the achievement gap in academic performance between Black and white students in America. And we know that a substantial portion of that is caused by this kind of unconscious bias. And so the implications of this are enormous.
It's also cool that, we're starting to see these systemic changes, these systemic effects, to the school system itself. So there's the impact on the teacher. Like, for example, we're talking now about data from the Healthy Minds program. This is, for those of you who are watching who aren't familiar, this is a completely free mobile app that Richie and I, with a great team at the Center for Healthy Minds and Healthy Minds Innovations, created. And now more than 1 million people have downloaded this. We've done all sorts of rigorous research on it. So this is showing pretty amazing impacts at the individual level, usually on the order of 20 to 30% improvements in things like depression and anxiety from a very, very modest amount of doing these practices, just like a month, 5 minutes a day for a month, along those lines. But the really cool thing is we're seeing changes to systems. That's kind of amazing to me, and especially from such a small dosage, so to speak, from just a few minutes a day for something that is not designed to be a system changer, right? It's just for the teachers, for their own mental health and well-being. But maybe you could just comment on that, because I know it's been a little surprising to all of us. Perhaps not surprising, but surprising to see such a signal so early in the training trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. So the finding that I think you're referring to, Cort, and this has not been published yet. It will be published soon, but it's a finding where and this is the work of Matt Hirschberg in our center, where we see changes in the teacher's perception of trust in the school administration as a function of their uh, well-being training. So teachers that are randomly assigned to go through the well-being training end up trusting their school administrators significantly more than teachers randomly assigned to a control group. And that is kind of amazing because it does suggest that there is more of a system level change occurring that will have ripple effects throughout the entire school system.
And this, coming back to this question of practice, so these are from teachers in this case, or not entirely teachers. There's also other school employees who've been doing this, but it takes us back to a shift in perspective that I think comes along with doing these kinds of practices where we start viewing not only our meditation practice or whatever, we're doing for our own mental health as part of something much bigger. It's not just about me and my life, but we're thinking about that ripple effect, and we're motivated to send those ripples of care and kindness and compassion out into the world. And so you can see it, and we are starting to see that ripple effect showing up, benefiting students, for example, benefiting, the school system as a whole. For example, the, teachers who do this are more likely to still be teaching a few years later. So it's benefiting the system in a variety of ways. So you can imagine that doing something similar for your family, doing some wherever you might work. If you're out in the world doing these practices, it's just that shift in perspective. So maybe we could just each, Richie, comment on how we practice this. And I wanted to show one simple way that I know you and I both do all the time, and actually we did before this very episode, is simply to reflect on one's motivation. It's the simplest thing, but yet it's something we rarely do, and it is a total game changer. So just for example, Richie and I, before we started recording, we were just kind of catching up and talking before we hit record for this episode. But before we actually started recording, we actually both paused for about a minute, and we just sat there. And Richie, you can comment on what was going on in your mind. But I was just doing this very traditional meditative practice that I've learned, where I was just imagining that whatever good comes of this thing we're about to do, we're just about to launch Dharma Lab and record this first episode. And I was just thinking, I hope whoever hears this is benefited in some way. And I hope that they might then spread that out so the people they interact with will benefit, and so on and so on. And so it just creates a wave of hopefully well-being and happiness and flourishing in the world that just spreads out infinitely in all directions. And it's amazing to me, the space that just puts us in, or puts me in when I do it. So I don't know, Richie,
Yeah,
what did you do in that
ex
space?
exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, I do that as you say, Court, a lot of all the time during the day, just in various kinds of activities. Um, and Yeah, I was imagining when we were doing that together, that this is going to be a project that will help people to discover the true nature of their minds. It will connect them to their own innate kindness and compassion, and it will benefit their lives and spread. And that's, both of us have the same aspiration to make this world a better place, and it is with that aspiration that I know both of us are engaging with this Dharma Lab project. But you can do this with anything. I mean, I went out for a bike ride yesterday, and I do this, but I went out alone, and before I rode, I spent about a minute before I got on my bike, just reflecting on how getting physically healthier is not just beneficial for me, but it will give me more vitality to do the work that I'm doing that can benefit others. And it'll benefit my family if I'm healthier, all the people I interact with. And it's simple. It takes literally 1 minute. And then as I was riding, I actually, and that kind of recycled. I came back to that a few times. Um, wow, this is super cool. And it gives me motivation for doing that. You can do that with virtually anything. And it doesn't take much, and it just changes the quality of it. And things that are even annoying. Um, uh, I change the litter in our house every night, scoop the litter, and I just do a
Cat
little
litter, for
reflect,
those who are
cat
not
litter.
cat
So
people.
yeah, sorry. And
I'm a dog
it's
person.
but it's like, this is not just for me and for the kitty, but it's for everyone. It's, people who walk into the room are not gonna have to smell this. It's good for the family. And again, these are such easy things to do, and really doesn't take any extra time. You can do it as you're doing the activity.
It's so simple, and it is completely life changing. I mean, it's something you literally can do anytime, anywhere. I mean, even right now, you don't even, I mean, we talked about pausing for a little bit and doing it in a more formal way. But even like as you're watching this, like, for all of you watching this, almost everything we do in our lives, we just do kind of out of habit. We hit play, we do things, whatever we do in our lives, and we don't really think about why we're doing it. But this is just a shift in perspective. So as you're listening to this, if you just shift your perspective and you're just thinking, okay, of course I'm interested in, or hopefully you're, hopefully you're interested in this. I'm doing this because I'm interested and I want to learn. But just shifting that perspective. So now you're thinking, in addition to benefiting yourself, it's not as though you jettison that completely, but now you're thinking, may this not only benefit me, may that ripple out and help others. May it make me a kinder person. So in my next interaction, I'll just be primed to do something helpful for whoever I meet and interact with, and so on and so forth. So you're just kind of thinking about that ripple effect, and it's so motivating. Everything becomes meaningful. As you said, even the most
Exactly.
mundane things, you just shift the perspective, and suddenly it's this meaningful activity, and you're primed to be of service. The thing that I've noticed, when I've really reflected on kind of the inner psychology of what's going on with this shift, when you just shift into kindness mode and service mode, is that a lot of our lives we're we're basically trying to get our needs met. And we have this sense of like, I need something from the world. I need something from this interaction. I need something from my job. I need something from this situation. And we're trying to get our needs met. That mindset is a mindset of inner impoverishment. When we feel that, we feel as though we don't have enough and we need situation X to meet our needs or relationship X to meet our needs. And so we're just constantly feeling hungry about the world. If you're in the mindset of service, you're overflowing. Like you can't be in a mindset of kindness or compassion without feeling that not only do you have enough, you have more than enough because you can give some away, you can share. And so it's almost, this gets back to the innate thing. It's like this innate sense of richness that the more you
Yeah,
give, the more rich you feel. You don't feel impoverished by that.
exactly.
You feel more
E-
enriched by it. And it just becomes this positive loop. But our society is so oriented to like needs, like, are you getting your needs met? What are your needs? Are you clear about your needs? We just get fixated on that. And we just feel empty. We're just left with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. No, it's so important. So important.
So I'm wondering if we could, I think we can have a whole nother discussion on practice because there's actually a lot to say on the mechanics of kind of the technology, the inner technology, not the outer technology, the inner technology of how you tune into this frequency and how you train it. So maybe we can have a follow up. But I'm just curious, maybe we can end with Richie. What have you found the most inspiring, whether from research or from spending time with great teachers like Mingyur Rinpoche, who's one of our meditation teachers, or His Holiness the Dalai Lama? What lights you up when you think about this whole area? What has most inspired you that you've learned in recent years?
I mean, I find that in my own personal life, when I'm really able to embody uh, these qualities and come from a place of abundance and really just want to give it away. And it as you were suggesting, Court, when you're doing that, um, it's precisely the opposite of draining. There's just a limitless quality that seems to emerge, and you can just feel the benefits that it's having on those around you, and so, I think that this is really important. And its opposite, which we really didn't spend a lot of time talking about, which, I think is fine, but just to point it out, its opposite is kind of, or not necessarily its opposite, but a an obstacle that has been written a lot about of loneliness and being socially disconnected is it can really eat away at our well-being and our physical health. And it just doesn't take that much to reorient, to be of service to others, and just really little things, just expressing appreciation, complimenting someone, saying thank you. These are just, such little things, but we have opportunities for this every day, many times a day, and just reminding ourselves to harness these opportunities, and it really can make an enormous difference.
So true. Well, you are a great inspiration, I think, to all of us who know you and spend time with you. A great living exemplar of what we're talking about. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we are in an era that is just so desperate for kindness and compassion and just basic civility to people, especially to people who we don't agree with. You know, where sometimes it feels like things are coming apart at the seams. And now it just really feels like we can't afford to not do this anymore. We really need to find a way to nurture the best of ourselves as humans because we're living through an era where we're seeing oftentimes what happens when we don't.
Exactly.
And I think the research is showing that this is possible, not only possible for all of us, but the point you made earlier, it's so much easier than you think. Literally a couple minutes a day can make a huge difference. And imagine a lifetime with just these small moments, as you said. I mean, this is not changing our lives, it's changing the world, and the world needs this. So a privilege and an honor to share this journey with you,
Yes,
Richie. And
thank you so much, Cort. I really appreciate it, and I love doing this with you.
yeah, likewise. And for all of you who, if you're still here listening to us, for joining us for the discussion and hopefully the first of many. So stay tuned, and we look forward to continuing the discussion with you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.